Welcome to the Aircon Vault. Recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors. A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Soundcuts, Sugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
My talk is about the game that we're making, The Quiet Things, and the title is Supporting Story with Sound. Before I get started, there is a content warning. The game especially deals with topics around abuse, self-harm, and suicide, and how they relate to the audio in the game. So I'm just going to read this for everyone. If they're hard topics for you or you find it triggering, please be super mindful and feel free to not watch or listen or take a break at any time. It'll be online forever, I think anyway, but you know, it's not for everyone. And I'm happy to talk quite candidly about these things, but not everyone is able to or wants to. So yes. I will try and keep an eye on the chat while I'm doing this. So if people have questions while we're going, I should be able to respond to them. So yeah, I'm quite happy to have, let's say, like a bit of a live chat while I'm talking. So it's always good if you've got something that I'm currently talking about that you have a question about, I'll just answer it. So yes, lovely. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Alyx Jones. I'm the founder of Silverscript Games, which is a really small indie company that I founded in 2022. And my whole background is in game audio, though, and I've worked full-time prior to that as a post-production lead, primarily in voiceover, but also did some sound design and freelance music composition. So back over 10 years ago now, I originally studied creative music technology, and then I did a master's in music composition, but I was always very much in the more rock band kind of a vibe rather than classical music. And I mean, I like everything, but I'm not very, very good at music theory. So I could do with a few more awards, Alyx. Yeah, there's probably a few more I could get. I don't know. But so yeah, I studied music, but I always studied it with a focus on technology. And so I did things like Pure Data, Max MSP, and so I did a lot of visual programming around the music as well. And I liked synths and electronic stuff. And I'm a guitarist primarily, but I also dabble with anything I can get my hands on. So after I graduated from my master's, which was, I think, 2018, so that was about 6 years ago now, I then worked as a youth worker. I ran a music project for disadvantaged young people in the area, and I was still freelancing alongside this, doing music composition for a couple of games, which actually was pretty good. Like I did quite well out of it. But I kind of found being a youth worker was quite emotionally draining, and if anything, those services are even more unstable than the video games industry at the moment, despite everything, because you'll have really short contracts for working with young people, and it's quite statistically driven as to how much you can measure that your support is actually helping them. And I think it's not a very good way of working. So I was ultimately frustrated by those things. So I decided to move into the games industry, which is something I always wanted, but I really wanted to work with young people and give back something, because when I was younger, I was homeless. And so I came back to work at the same place where I lived, even though they had a new building, but it's the same company. But I basically interviewed for a job at Liquid Violet, which is a studio in London, and they primarily do voiceover now, and they don't really do post-production anymore, because I was laid off in December alongside the 20,000 others in the industry who've also been struggling with layoffs. But it was kind of a silver lining for me, because I already started my company and I was trying to do too many things at once, because I also do event coverage for the Sound Architect. I work for ThinkSpace Education doing tutoring and marketing, as well as trying to make a whole video game, and then doing a full-time job at Liquid Violet was too many things to sustain anyway. So it wasn't nice to go through. Like, it's not nice for anyone, but the positive of it is that I've actually been able to focus on this full-time now. The games that I've worked on in the past include things like Elden Ring and Final Fantasy. I mostly did post-production, so basically that's looking after dialogue recordings after they come out of the studio. But I also did some things like script supervision, which is when you're in a session calling out things that for example, with Arcane, if in the animatics there was some running, but it wasn't scripted, I'd be like, oh, we need to pick up some efforts and breaths for this. Or if we'd missed a line, and then making a note of all the best takes that the director was calling out, which is very, very interested to be involved in, especially for Arcane, which is very cool. Did some Xenoblade. All this Borderlands was the first one I ever did. So this was all basically dialogue. And then, yeah, I do have a couple of awards, but BAFTA Breakthrough is the main one that I'll mention because it's what gave me a launch pad to be able to work on my own game, an own studio, and connected me with lots of people in the industry. So it's not really a boast. It's more like, if you're thinking that that might be you, I'd really recommend applying for it, because it's not just an award. They really, really do support you. So highly recommend that. If anyone has not heard of Arcane, which I hope some people maybe have, The Quiet Things is a narrative-driven walking simulator style game. So it's kind of inspired by games like Gone Home and What Remains of Edith Finch. They're the kind of games that I really love to play. I think I always remember when I was at university and I played Dear Esther for the first time, and I was wandering around going, oh, where am I supposed to go in this game? I don't get it. And then you get the dialogue come through in small bits, and it drives you through the whole story. And when you finish it, it was like, wow, what was that? That was really cool. So it made me fall in love with dialogue-driven storytelling, and I quite like things like Stanley Parable. These are all quite old examples now, but I don't think that many games are still working in that space now, especially in the last few years. So I'm hoping there's a nice little space for us in that. But it's also my autobiography, and there's also very few games that tell real stories. There's a couple, like that Dragon Cancer is one of the biggest obvious examples, and Nina Freeman makes some really cool games if you're interested in that area, but it's quite untapped, I guess the word is. And we've seen some really cool examples in like Netflix, for example. They've done like Baby Reindeer recently, which is a person's true experience with stalking, and he even plays himself in the game, in the show, not a game, which is nuts. I definitely do not play myself in this game. I'm not a voice actor. But it does deal with sensitive topics around abuse, self-harm and suicide, and that's not in an insensitive way. It's because we want to talk about things that don't get talked about enough in society, let alone in games. And when they are talked about in games, it's often not the focus of the story. It's not always dealt with sensitively. And I'm thinking of things like horror games, for example, might deal with abuse, but it's creating some sort of ghost or demons out of it rather than the actual reality of what it's like to live with those things. So yes, we don't actually have a release date yet. It's probably going to be next year, but we're still very much in development. So all the assets or examples you see are not finalized, so bear that in mind. I'm going to play the trailer for anyone who hasn't seen it, just so you can get a bit of an idea of what the game looks like and what I'm talking about.
We're just giving you a call as your wife is not doing well. She might not have long left.
Mum, she's at the hospice though. She hasn't gone to a special place, she's just gone. It's just me and you, Wolfie. Dear Diary, my name is Alice.
What I'm about to tell you, I've never told anyone. Things just feel wrong. Everything just gets worse and worse.
It's there to remind you what happens when you disobey me.
Am I bad? Am I evil?
Look at me when I'm speaking to you!
I have to get out of here. If I don't, it will kill me.
Awesome. So Yes. Oh, a quick answer to the question, what platforms will it be on? We definitely will be on PC, so through Steam. We have been approved for Xbox, so we'll definitely be on that. PlayStation we're working on, and Switch is also approved. Whether they all come out at exactly the same time, I cannot say for sure, but we will definitely be on Steam first. So yeah. With the game, this is the story overview, and I'm only going over this, and it doesn't really contain spoilers, just themes about it. That it links to the sound design and the music and the dialogue regularly, so I'm gonna just give like a really quick overview. That we deal with the protagonist that I rename as Alice in the game, who's 8 years old in the first level, and it deals with the loss of a parent quite soon on in the game, and it continues in the aftermath of that, and the father remarries. It also deals with emotional and domestic abuse in the house. It covers the age of like 13 to 15 quite intensely, and then running away from home at 16. And then the game also deals with really heavy topics around sexual abuse and grooming, as well as multiple suicide attempts. So it's definitely not for the faint-hearted. And it takes place throughout lots of different environments. So it's definitely not an open world game, but you'll go through various houses, through school, things like even the skate park we included, and like some gardens. Like, we wanted to have contrast, like not everything's like being hit really hard in the face with all these topics. There's moments of like friendship and nature and things like that that create that balance in the game. So, dialogue. For the dialogue process, I'm going to go through how we dealt with the dialogue in terms of like the whole process of what we did, and then I'll move on to sound design and music. So I start with a narrative overview similar to what we just looked at, and then also go through a character list. And the first thing we have to do before we even approach actors is create casting sides. And this is also a screenshot of all the drafts of the script that are apparently my first draft, but I thought it would be funny to include. So I've got an example of what our casting sides look like, because I don't think many people actually would even know what this is. And so if you're looking at make a game, if you're a voice actor that's never seen that, or if you're just like working on the audio for dialogue behind it, this might be something that's really interesting to see. This is for the main character, so there's more detail than some of the other characters would have, but this is the actual casting size that we sent to anyone who auditioned. So we created, I think this was maybe 4 pages, and it's got to have information like the age range, the gender, presumably for most characters, unless they're an alien, which not in our game, but in some games you might have a creature. An accent for us was important because I grew up down south in England, and because it's a true story, I can't change too many of the accents too wildly, because those experiences are sometimes tied to location, and I certainly don't know what it's like to grow up north, for example, or in Scotland. So it would be, much as it's nice to have a variety of accents, we pick and choose where it's important and where it's not. And again, with the ethnicity, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you don't see the characters in the game, and you never see the actors in the game. There's no face capture or anything like that. But for this, for example, because there's a child actor that plays young Alice, they have to match that. Lewis says it's confidential. Yes, but it's my confidential. So yeah, the character background is really important. I think it helps actors to dig into what they're actually portraying and like really feel the performance that they're going to give. Because if you give them really minimal information, or sometimes people might just get like a paragraph and some lines to read with no other information, it's pretty hard to kind of dig a performance out of that. I'm sure people manage, but why not give people all the tools they could possibly have? We go through character relationships as well, especially for some of our audition lines. I kind of call and response, not call and response, but they're responses to other lines, and we give information about the game and the topics. And I think we've rewritten the content warning and some of the information that we give about the game a couple of times, because people are potentially put off by some of the topics, and we have to get them to understand that we're not glorifying any of it. It's about raising awareness. So yes, the audition lines are right at the end, and there's just a little extra page of an example of the kind of things that they'd be responding to. And so generally when actors give tapes back, they don't actually perform both lines, they just say their own lines, but we know that there would be a gap in there. And it's quite cool because if you are auditioning for two roles that would slot in with each other, for example, if we were doing the other person in this conversation, we could audition those parts and put them together and listen to them side by side. It can be really important, especially with like friendship groups or people who might be in relationships in the game, that they sound roughly the same age. So even if the actors could be like wildly different ages, but as long as they feel right together, that's what's important. And as well, we have things like mother and daughter relationships as well, which is always important to get right. So yeah, so Kirsty Gilmore is our casting and voice director. She's incredible, and she basically gave me feedback about how to format these and how to write them and then rewrite them until it was what was right for the actors. And although I've seen casting sides in my time and worked in studios around that environment, can't say I've seen really good ones. And so I hope that what we've written is a good example of what a really good one would look like. So you're welcome to look at that and use it as an example. I really don't mind. I think sharing is caring. But yeah, once Kirsty was happy with that, she sent out the casting sides to voice agents, and some actors maybe don't have agents and they might have got sides through her, but we don't do open casting calls because I don't think we have the capacity to manage hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of auditions, which it's just, the life as an indie is really tricky. And then once we give them a couple of weeks usually, and then we'll get auditions back. And for anyone who's not a voice actor and doesn't know what that means, the self-tape is basically where they would take those lines that we've given them, they'll record them either on their phone or through a mic that they've got. It doesn't have to be on camera whatsoever because it's not a filmed audition. We just need to know what they hear, what they sound like. We need to hear them. Kirsty then goes through and shortlists all the options into A, B, and other. And basically A choices are all her top choices. But there's a couple of instances where I've gone through all of them just to see what's come through, like out of interest, or maybe some of the top choices aren't doing it for me. It's tricky when it's a real story because you're always remembering what the real people sounded like, but you're also having to think it's a game. They don't have to sound exactly like the real people. In fact, if they did, it wouldn't necessarily sound good. So it's a very collaborative process, and I don't generally overrule anything that Kirsty says. I'm always there to listen to what she has to say because she has the expertise in it. I don't. So that's why I hired her. How do you find it using Google Drive for audio? I mean, it's just a storage place, really. It seems fine. I don't know. It's nothing. It's just auditions for this, really. I guess I store everything personally on hard drives as well. Blah, blah. Not exciting. Once we've decided on our top choices, we then offer the parts to our top choices and then get their availability from and with the studio as well. So again, if you've never worked in voiceover production, we do something called putting people on pencil, and I'll put the studio on pencil as well. And that basically means it's not confirmed yet, so it's not locked in. I won't have to pay for it, so it may still move. And then once we have everything on pencil and we've looked at it and we're happy with the schedule, we'll then confirm it. And that means at that point it's locked in and we'll pay for the work. But things happen a lot, things get delayed, blah, blah, blah. We're quite good as an indie studio because there's not too many of us to wrangle. But when you've got huge AAA productions, timelines will move constantly and actors will change availability. They've been cast in a stage show now, so they're not, and you have to decide, am I going to recast this role? Do I need it right now? Can I wait? All this fun. We also book wellbeing facilitators for sessions. We didn't have it in the first few sessions we did, although I don't think the content was hugely problematic in terms of like something that would trigger people. And we were also running on a really small budget because we were just making like a prototype for the game at the time. But I probably in retrospect would have forked out for it just to make sure we'd had it end to end. But we still brought people in as soon as we had any more content around like abuse, especially the sexual abuse. That all has to have someone there. So what they do is they provide support before the session, during the session, and after the session. So this is not just for actors, this is for the studio engineer as well, for the director, for myself, for anyone who's involved in the session that would need it. And I think during the session, we don't usually have issues because you're very in the zone and you're focusing on getting stuff recorded. It's afterwards when you let the content sit with you a little bit that you might find yourself more affected by it. And so having someone to talk to afterwards, and then if you need further support, they can signpost you in the right place. I think I've not seen any other games production do that in my 5 years working in that facility. So I hope that more people will consider it. Yep. Blah, 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 scripts ready. Oh yeah, so we always send the scripts ahead of sessions. I think it's generally good for actors to be able to see what's coming up. Like, I think it's rare that it's actually necessary to go, oh, I'm not going to send the scripts because I need like a first read and natural performance of someone who's never seen it before, because like they're an actor. It's literally their job to be able to give you that without actually being their first thing. And I think with any content that is even stuff around death or violence, which you might find with a lot of games, even like Fortnite style multiplayer games, you know, you don't know what someone's been through or if they've got family who've been at war or whatever. So just having a heads up and seeing what's going to come in the session is something that I hope everyone will do eventually. Anyway, once that's all confirmed, the recordings take place. So in the studio, usually we try and keep it to a minimum, just because it's kind of a privileged environment to be in. And it's also for the actor, you know, they're having to put themselves potentially in a vulnerable position. And they don't want to be watched by more people than is necessary, generally, especially not for this kind of thing. So Kirsty, our director, sits up front, and the engineer will also be up front. I'll sit behind, and I'm just there. I don't chime in generally unless I'm asked for my opinion, because too many cooks and all that. I'm just there. If there's something really that I really think needs redoing, I'll say, but I won't interrupt anything. I'll wait till there's a nice break in the session. We always made sure that where we have a studio, we also have like what's called a green room next door. So it's just a separate space that if people needed to take a breather and just have time on their own, they've got that. And the wellbeing facilitator can obviously use that if they need a break as well, and also if they wanted to speak to anyone about anything. The sessions, I mean, you hit record, you record the lines, but Kirsty will often read parts in, or if we've already recorded the part, which is quite nice, we can play that in for the actor to bounce off. So I think, you know, versus the next best thing of having all the actors in the booth at the same time, that works quite well. We have worked with, so Lisa and Emily, so Lisa's the therapist character and Emily's the main character of Alice. We did some of their sessions. You can see in the GIF there's two mics there, so Emily's just behind the camera. They did sessions together to bounce off each other, and they were basically like counselling sessions. So I wouldn't put like someone who's playing an abusive person in the same booth as someone who's playing the victim, because I think that's inappropriate. But for some of the roles where they could bounce off each other, like for the therapy sessions, we did arrange that, and I think it was really nice. For anyone who doesn't know, also the general recording rate in a studio for most places is about 500 words an hour that an actor should get through. We basically put this down by like 20%. So we would have time to talk about content, and also have extra breaks if we needed it. So there's just like more of a fail safe, and we're not rushing through having to just like churn through content. We can be considered about it. So yeah, that's why we've brought it down a little bit. But ultimately, you know, everyone's always got budgets and money. So I understand that not everyone can do that. And if there's not a need, then that's fine. You know, if you're doing a lot of, I don't know, efforts, then doing 500 words wouldn't be so hard. Once it's all recorded, I'll go back through and check all the files, because they do get labelled during session, but I always double check everything because I'm a perfectionist. We always record everything at 24:48. You can record at 96 if you really want to, but it's not necessary unless you're thinking of doing like really heavy processing or stretching the files out a lot. Always mono for us for dialogue and WAV files as well. I'm very passionate about leveling dialogue to an appropriate level. So if you haven't ever tried it and you want to, minus 23 LUFS is the target that I recommend for games dialogue in general. For not just because this is a natural game, but for most things, I would always advocate for using minimal compression, use a small EQ roll off at around 50 Hertz. You could use things like a declicker and a limiter, but use it really sparingly. Like I always use kind of settings that are never going to be obtrusive, because afterwards I'll then go through manually and crop and clean up everything in Adobe Audition. So this is like the spectral editor that you see when you open it up. It's very similar to Isotope RX in terms of like the viewport that you get, not the plugins. And I don't think there's any tool that can do what a person can do manually yet. So running anything really harsh like denoisers, yes, still use them if you need to, but for studio recordings you shouldn't really need to. And declicking can end up, if you're doing it too harshly, you can take things like T's out of the voice. So we want to keep that as audible as possible. Minus 23 LUFS is the standard for gameplay music. Probably. I don't know. I think minus 23 is the general target that a lot of people are going for, but there's not any proper standardization anywhere at the moment, and that's why you get some people going all the way to like minus 14 LUFS, because that's what they think is appropriate, because that's what YouTube says for like videos, but I don't think it works for a game. Especially not if you're only doing the dialogue to minus 14. That's really loud, and you're going to, you know, wreck it a little bit. Question about minus 23 LUFS from Annie. You mean getting the full mix with everything else plus dialogue at that level, or do you mean mixing the dialogue alone to minus 23? So the dialogue alone, I put to 23. Everything else is separate. I'm just talking about the dialogue at this point. And it will get mixed again after it's put in the game anyway. But I think if you've got everything spoken at a similar level, you wouldn't have to do too much work in it. But if you've got a game that is a lot of shouting, then sometimes minus 14 or minus 16 is more appropriate for that, because the dynamic's different. So it's not to say you should squash the dynamic. You shouldn't have minus 23 for every single file. It's your overall reading for everything. So if you were looking at individual files, you might have 23 to 26 for whispered, maybe 20 for like spoken, and then 16 for like shouted, and it would overall roughly get to a similar point, assuming it's not all shouted or all whispered. Yeah, Sony recommends minus 23. I've worked with them, and I think they're probably leading the charge in getting a bit more of a standardized process. And I've consulted with them and stuff. But yeah, like ultimately anyone can put a game on Steam, even on the Xbox store, once you've got approved, and no one's telling you that you must hit this target. Versus when you work for Netflix, they have really stringent targets, and if you're way under, it will just get boosted or compressed, or if you're way over. So everything should be roughly at the same level, whereas there's nothing like that in games platforms that I'm aware of. Anyway, sidebar. I also will comp any conversations into complete files, which is quite a lot of the game actually. There's, well, not everything, but there's quite a few conversations in there between actors, and we always have multiple takes to choose from. We always have favorite takes that we'll export, but we can always go back and find a different one if we needed something to fit together better. Our game's built in Unreal 5. Mac doesn't particularly seem to like Unreal, so while I was still working on my Mac, I had to downscale everything to 1648, which was really annoying, and now I've got a Windows machine to be able to do it back to 2448. Don't ask why, I have no idea. And then I'll also add effects, but really minimal stuff. There's only like one small example of when we do that really. Generally everything's really natural because the performances are kind of all based on real life events. The implementation in Unreal is pretty straightforward for dialogue as well. I don't even use the dialogue system in Unreal, where it's just really basic for us. There's no wild stuff going on, and so I personally just trigger them as sound, like effects, rather than dialogue things, which there's like two different types of object or whatever. Cool tip though, there is a built-in subtitle function for the audio files, so you can literally double click any audio file and add your subtitles like right into the inspector, which I didn't know about, and people don't use it. They spend ages programming this like UI, which is great if you need to change like the text size and font a lot, but blah blah. Yeah. What DAW is used for voice recordings? Mark, it does not matter, it's up to you. And yes, minimal effects. So I always choose the path of least resistance. So you'll see that, you know, some of the things I do with the game, for example, like not even implementing it properly as dialogue, it's like, why overcomplicate something if you don't need to? And if you're not going to use the full functionality of it, like do what you know and what's quickest, because you're just costing yourself money and time over something that's not important. And especially with indie games, but all games in general, they're going to like you if you can stick to budgets and schedules. So I've got an example in a second of what I've just been talking about. So in this scene, like I'll go through the content warning again. It deals with suicide and suicidal feelings. There's nothing graphic in it, but it's pretty heavy. So it has the raw dialogue for Alice, and then it has the processed, what I would call negative self-talk, which we called Alter Alice just for being able to differentiate when I was processing it. And it's not supposed to represent anything like multiple personality disorder or hearing voices or psychosis, nothing like that. It's purely supposed to be that you have your own internal monologue, and often that conflicts with itself or what other people are telling you. We also have the dialogue for Patrick in this, and that's completely natural, but it's treated for distance because you don't see him in the game whatsoever. You don't see anybody in the game, but you will hear him from further away. So it's like you're listening to memories or replaying something that's happened. In the sound design, you'll see that there's rain, and so that's there to match the visuals. There's also the sound of traffic underneath. I haven't actually animated the cars in this scene yet, so if anything, the sound design's working harder to paint the picture because they're not even actually moving. There's also concrete footsteps there and the sound of a police siren. I made the very deliberate decision not to use music because later in that scene there will be music, and we'll come to that a little bit later on, but I think it gives it that impact and space that it deserves. The implementation for it is really quick and dirty. It's just trigger boxes that when you walk through it starts the dialogue and plays it, and that's it. There's meta sounds for the bridge material, so when you're walking on different materials it changes in the game, and the spot sounds are in some places. I don't know if you'll notice it that much in this example, but things like when you're near the lampposts, you can hear the rain a little bit more because it's bouncing off that. So yes, let's play this, but again, be very aware that it's dealing with the theme of suicide.
I can do this. It's the only way.
Alice, you caused all this.
I didn't mean to. I don't know how to make it right.
Everyone fucking hates you.
Everyone hates me. I'm bad. I'm evil. I have to make it right. Be brave. Be brave. You'll be quick. Wait until there's no cars in this lane.
Alice! Oh, fuck! Alice!
No! No, go away!
Alice, wait!
Shit! Stop! Don't come any closer!
No. Don't be silly now. Come on. I've stopped. I've stopped.
Turn around!
Alice, I'll stop, or I'll do whatever you need. It's on your terms. Just come back over the railings.
Well done for getting through that. And I'm going to move on to the sound design for something a bit lighter. So, in a similar way to the dialogue, everything is pretty natural. Nothing's wildly processed or hyper real or anything like that for the majority of the game. Ultimately, because it's all real, we can mostly record and do those things for real, so we don't need to, go to a gun range or anything. But that did mean we could record most of the sound design for the game quite easily. So Kev, our sound designer, created a lot of assets, and I cruelly edited it back to the minimum we need because I'm going back to my kind of theory of doing the minimum, and there's no point having 20 variations of something if you're not going to use it. Like, we should always keep to what's appropriate for the game and have files as small as possible, The first thing we did was create asset lists, and this is updated constantly throughout the game. So it's a live document. It's not just one thing that gets given over and then comes back. And I mean, Kev's very free to make suggestions about things if he's playing the demo, or he'll play through the demo and go, this is using the same door sound on these two different doors and it's not timed properly, blah, blah, blah. There's always things that I've got to go back and forth on, but that's the fun of working collaboratively and iteratively. So yeah, we record quite a lot of Foley, and the theme of like storms is used throughout the game fairly often, and so whenever there is rain and storm, we're quite excited to go and get mics out and record it as soon as we can. I think there was a storm about a month ago where there was barely any rain, so you got the proper rumble and crack of the thunder without the extra noise, which is really, really cool. And I'm sure most people who are sound designers probably eagerly kind of run with their mics as soon as they hear similar things as well. We also borrowed a patio slab from our neighbours and did a lot of footsteps with my actual shoes. For that bridge scene as well, because it's concrete but it's raining, we made the slab slightly wet, and Kev used I think sugar he sprinkled on it to get that kind of grit crunch effect, which I think sounds very good. We took some things from sound libraries. Things like vehicles and police sirens are much harder to source. I mean, I haven't actually asked the police personally if I can go and record their cars, but it was easy enough to find one online, so we've used that for now. Kev edits everything and processes everything and gets a rough baseline for the volume, and then once we've actually put it in Unreal, we'll level it a bit more, because I think once you put it in the engine, especially if they're 3D sounds or spot sounds, it doesn't really matter how well you mixed it, it's changed at that point. So we'll do like another pass of just walking around the game and seeing if anything stands out too much. So I have an example. Oh, it might actually play. It was processing earlier. Okay, so this is basically the house in the game, and you can see in certain places where there's spot sounds for things and the general footsteps. It changes between material of the carpet and the stairs and things like that. So let's have a little play. So yeah, I don't know how well that comes across online, because some of them are kind of more subtle sounds, but hopefully you can hear it. If not, I'm happy to put it online. But yeah, someone asked, is there an inherent advantage with recording a sound if you can find it in an online asset and fits? Well, I mean, yes, because you'll always have a lot more flexibility in recording your own Foley in terms of what you actually need and how you're going to implement it. And also, you won't find someone else's game with the exact same sound in it. But if you're heavily editing or processing stuff, then, do whatever works for you. I don't think there's this mindset of you must record everything if you can. I think you should record some things, definitely, because you want to have a unique sound print. Otherwise, you just sound like everybody else's games. And for this especially, because we've got details like it deals with different ages, and so we have like the child Alice and the teenage Alice, and having like different weights of footfall for that and things like that. If you can record it, it just saves yourself the time of having to try and process it in a way that fits that. Oh, sorry if you couldn't hear it very well. I definitely will put it online. Okay. Oh, don't want to play again. Stop. Right, let's move on to music. So yeah, I'm sure like most people here, music was such a huge part of my life growing up. And I think lots of us go into audio because of that. I mean, we don't necessarily start out as a sound designer, but we connect with music for whatever reason. I find that it's one of the best coping mechanisms and ways of expressing myself and all of these things, and that translates to other audio as well, but it starts with music. But equally, when I was growing up, I didn't necessarily have the words to put my experiences in, but lots of songs had lyrics that explained those things, or at least communicated how I was feeling when I couldn't. And so I wanted to incorporate that a bit into the game, because I think it's the case for a lot of people who go through maybe some kind of similar experiences. The use of silence and absence in music was just as important as when we use it, because it creates a lot more impact. So we do have 2 licenses approved. The first is for Drown by Bring Me the Horizon, and the second is for Atlantic by Sleep Token. And if you don't like rock or metal music, you probably won't know who they are, and that's totally fine. But equally, this game is still a work in progress, and so while we have that approved, it doesn't mean that we have final sign-off. We still have to record the songs and get them to approve it, so it could still change, but that's what we're going with at the moment. It was quite tricky to lock songs down. I originally wanted things that were maybe from a little bit earlier, but a lot of labels kind of swallowed up all the smaller labels that dealt with a lot of, let's say, emo music from the noughties, and they're either very expensive to get or the bands don't really want you to cover them. So that's fine. We got 2 really, really cool songs that I'm very excited to do anyway, so it's cool. So we decided to do arrangements of these songs rather than pay for the full license in terms of the recording that they've already got that's like on the albums, because we wanted to first make those songs a little more accessible for a wider audience. Not everybody likes rock and metal music, and that's totally fine. So I thought having like a mix of band and quartet makes it a little bit more vanilla, I guess. It's just easier to listen to, I suppose. And I also wanted to change it to have female vocals, because the game's ultimately my story and it's a female protagonist. I think having that voice consistent throughout the story works quite well. And so we're going to record that in August. Liz says, do you have to describe the usage of the songs before approval was made? Yeah, absolutely. We wrote at least like a 1-page document to the labels to pass on to the artists, and it describes exactly how the song is used in the game, what the context of it is, like what's going on in the story. I think it's mostly they don't want their music necessarily being used or abused in the wrong way, and they probably care where it goes. If you're that kind of like, some people might just grant a license for everything, but our experiences was that we had to tell them what we were doing with it so that they could make a decision about if they were okay with it. These licenses that you attain last, or will you have to make some kind of change update after a certain time as they're temporary? So they last forever, but they only apply to in-game usage. So it's very specific that you pay for example, you'll pay for like a license for publishing to PC, and then if you publish to console as well, you pay an extra license to publish to each platform. But as far as I'm aware, that's in perpetuity. But I mean, games don't last forever, and I suppose if we did like a remake or re-release in the future, that might need a new license again. But it is quite interesting. I'm thankful that I don't have to deal with it too much. There's a lovely guy called Justin who's our music supervisor who does that. Yes, Lewis, you cannot use them in trailers. It costs at least 4 times as much, if not more, to get stuff to use for trailers. And so, I mean, this is basically, I won't name any bands or anything, but to give like a ballpark figure, because I think it's interesting. you might pay, let's say, around 5k-ish for a license for a song for in-game, assuming it's not like a massive artist, but you would pay, let's say, 20k, like 4 times that, to be able to have to use that in a trailer, because that's basically a sync license. And then you usually, for sync licenses, especially for trailers, you probably only have like a month's usage out of it, whereas the game license lasts as long as we have the game up. So yeah, I don't know why it is, because I would have thought it would almost be the other way around. But I guess when they're looking at promo material, it's kind of seen as like advertisement, and that's where the prices go up. So that's probably why. And you can't release them in the soundtrack. That's a separate discussion as well. And I think if we did it, we would just give them full royalties for everything, because we're just doing it for the love, really. I don't think there's a huge amount of money to be made in the soundtracks versus the actual game itself. So if you've managed to secure really cool licenses, I think it's easier to just give the band the royalties for that, since it's their composition. But yeah, that is definitely a separate conversation, and you'd have like an additional term in your license or a separate license for it, depending on if you're just putting it on Spotify or you're doing a physical vinyl release. Like, they're all different things as well. There's a lot. You could do a whole talk about that, and I definitely wouldn't be the best person to give that talk. So for the game, we wanted to have these kind of music video impact moments. And so I was talking about the choice deliberately to not have music in a lot of the game, because when you do get that song hit, I think it creates like 10 times the impact, versus when you've been having like strings and choir and piano going the whole way and then they just transition into a song. I think it doesn't have that impact in the same way. So I don't know if anyone's played Dear Esther, but there's a moment where you're walking around the game, you're kind of above ground. It's, I don't know, hills and nature and stuff like that. But you just get dialogue play at certain moments, and then you hit this cave entrance. And once you enter the caves, they're kind of lit by this blue light. But the thing that really has an impact is that the choir comes in and you have this music play, and the whole game up till then, I think, was silent of music. It was just like ambience and dialogue. And I remember how much I was like, wow, where am I going? What's happening here? This is like magical. And I still remember that moment, even if I can't remember every other bit of the game. And so that was quite influential in how we designed some of the use of things. And we also used the music to design the levels around in those moments as well. And so I think we knew we wanted Drown for quite a long time. And when we got it, it was very exciting, because I'd already started designing the level around that, because I like the metaphor for everything feeling like you're underwater and overwhelmed by everything. So if you're familiar with the band Bring Me the Horizon, this is the song, and Drown is always used at a moment in the concerts when Ollie comes into the crowd and like sings it with the crowd. And so it's quite an important track for fans as well, because it's kind of about coming together even in the darkness. And so although the song is ultimately about the overwhelmingness of emotions, the way it's used in concerts and in our game is ultimately a positive thing in the end. So this screenshot next to it with the cars, that's from Dear Esther, I think, pretty sure. Slight spoilers, but that kind of design really influenced how I wanted to go with the bridge scene, to have it like flood to represent the being underwater feeling. And so that's when the music would play. And so I don't think I would have even necessarily used underwater visuals and things like that if we hadn't picked that song. The second song was Atlantic by Sleep Token, and we actually went to see them in January this year, I think it was, at Wembley. And the fans did a thing which was the Atlantic Project, where they walked around before the show and gave everyone these blue stickers to put over like their phone lights. And so when Vessel played the song and sung it, everyone could turn their flashlights on, but they were all blue. And I mean, if you've ever been to big concerts at Wembley and stuff like that, like, and it was only the arena, not the stadium, but seeing the expanse of people all represented in real life, like the picture doesn't do it justice, is quite an experience. And for him as well, I think he found it quite emotionally overwhelming. But there's lyrics in the song that deal with what I would say, to me, sounds like a suicide attempt. I can't say for sure. I didn't write the song, but they fitted really well in the game for a moment where we have everything turn to black, and then we'll have like blue lights to follow to get to the next point and to have trigger little bits while the song's playing. And so if I hadn't been at that concert, I probably wouldn't have had that idea again to design it around that theme. So it's really cool how you can take not just the music, but also the concert experiences to have that iterate on the game design process. Is, I don't know any other games that do it. Maybe they do, but it's something that you can get really cool results out of, I think. So to wrap up, in general, the dialogue is always prioritized. So it's going to be the central, because ultimately it's dialogue-driven storytelling, but nothing exists without all the other elements being considered. The sound design tells the story in a lot of places where there's no characters and visuals to do it. And I think that's more appropriate for the themes as well, because it would be horrendous to have some of the stuff actually acted out. Although, yes, maybe they do it in film and TV, or they have artistic ways of doing it. But I think, you know, we can represent those things in the audio really well and tell that story without having to visually represent it. And it's reflective of things like the state of mind that the character is in, as well as being able to bring the player into that world and feel like they're there experiencing it with you. So yeah, that really helps tell the story. And the music in the same supports it at times, but it has its moment to shine in those impact moments that it really comes to the forefront. And then in those times, the dialogue and sound design sits back, if there's even anything at all. And so I think having that music in those couple of times in the game to represent the innermost feelings, especially in the lyrics, wouldn't have that impact otherwise. But I'd say the fourth element is silence and absence, and that has equal importance to dialogue, sound, and music as when you're choosing not to use those things. Something to take away, maybe. Anyway, that's pretty much it for me. If people have questions, I'm incredibly happy to answer anything. I'll hang around for a little bit, whatever you want. I think we have like 20 minutes before we get kicked out, something like that. It's also really cool that AirCon runs alongside Steam Next Fest, and so I'm very busy this week because I'm doing both of those things. But if you want to play demos, there's loads of free demos online, not just our game. But if you are interested in our game, you can play the demo right now. So yes, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen and chat to anyone that wants to chat. Cool. But if you don't have questions, that's fine. No pressure. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Leading question, are you appearing again at AirCon? I might be. You might have to tell me the exact time and date that I'm supposed to be doing another panel, but we're doing a leadership and audio panel on Thursday at a time in the afternoon. Lewis can put the details in. Let me go through, hang on. Has the demo been available previously? So we showcased the demo at a couple of different events. We did WASD earlier in the year. We've done GDLX ages ago now. It was probably like a year and a half ago. That was the first time we ever showed it. And it's changed a lot since then because we constantly respond to player feedback. And if people tell us, I'm not finding this thing, I'm getting frustrated, or this is having an impact, or this isn't, then we change things based on that. And so we recently implemented basically like a built-in hint system. So we had a hint system before where when you walk around the game, you can hold down a key to highlight any of the items that you can interact with. But you might have noticed in the most recent video, there's little arrows in the game, and that's the same for everyone. So we basically scrapped the hint system completely and added that because they do it in Life is Strange and Edith Finch, and nobody goes, oh, there's a hint system. They're just like, oh, I'm being guided around the game. So yes, we have had the demo in many places, but this is the first time we've done Steam Next Fest, and you only get to do it once. So anything you can do to help out the algorithm find us is always appreciated. Blah, 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 blah. What is the process about finding these songs and to copyright? So, well, I mean, you can ask for anything as long as you have someone who has those contacts. So we're very lucky that Justin, our music supervisor, he worked for Laced prior, which is like a vinyl company. They release vinyls of video game soundtracks, but I think they work with composers and music licensing as well. So he's already experienced and has those contacts, and so anyone can technically approach a label and ask for that. You just have to look it up. If you find the artist that you want or the track that you want and look for anyone credited on that, you'll probably find the label, and then you can approach them and ask for a license and what you need. But I would recommend going with someone who knows what they're doing, because you could probably get ripped off quite easily. I certainly would. Well, I guess I wouldn't actually afford it, but you know. Lewis, about dialogue, do you have a naming convention that you stick to for dialogue? So we have like cycles in the game, which is as time passes, and so everything in the game has a cycle within the level. So we always have the number of the cycle first, then we'll have the line number, and then I always include like a description of what the item is that they're interacting with and the character name. So it's quite clear from looking at the file what that is. But I would recommend always just having like your line number first, because things get muddled up a little bit the way that we did it. So just have like, if you want a code that's like 100647, and then it'll always stay in order to the script if that's important. If you've got a game where it's not chronological, then have that. Have you ever worldalized dialogue? I don't know what that means. Do you mean localized, as in like translating stuff? If you clarify, I'm happy to answer that. Live on Watch the Developer Play. Oh yes, I am live on Steam. I'm two places at once, you know. This is a bit off topic of the talk, but I did wonder, have there been any troubles attracting funding, considering how difficult the subject matter is? I have a game in the early stages that deals with similar topics, and I'm wondering if that's something I have to be mindful of. I actually think that people are a bit better now as society in being open to that being spoken about. It depends what it is. I mean, there's a lot of games now that deal with death and grief, and that's become a lot more normalized. I think our game topics are a bit more out there, and we have to explain it really carefully and talk about how we're trying to break taboos around shame that people carry because of these things. But having said that, I think it actually gives us an edge when getting funding. So I would say it's the opposite. I think you're more likely to attract funding if you're doing it in an appropriate and sensitive way, because it might be your USP if you want to be really businessy about it, which is your unique selling point, is that you're trying to talk about something that's not traditionally done. So lean into it. Don't be afraid of it. From Lewis, are there any specific cool audio things you've managed to implement which other games typically don't do? Seeing as I have an extensive audio background, well, I don't know. I mean, I think the designing the levels around the music is quite rare in the way that we did with the tracks, because you would normally build the game and then add the music, or you kind of do it together. Like, other games definitely collaborate regularly over that. Like Journey was pretty good about they influenced each other all the way through, but we haven't collaborated. We've taken a track and gone, I'm designing the game around this. So I think that's maybe a specific thing. Kev does most of the sound design stuff. I mean, we use meta sounds and things like that, but I don't think it's anything crazy. But it's not, like, if anything, I don't even use middleware for the music at the moment because we just don't need to. And I never overcomplicate anything, even though I could. I just, until I need it, I don't go there. Re-record through a speaker in open world to add organic content to voice it. Oh, I've never done that, no. I mean, most of our game isn't set in big open spaces, and so to be fair, the booth is reasonable in terms of like the fact that people are inside houses or schools or whatever. But yeah, I've never re-recorded dialogue through speakers. There's so many really interesting, like, detailed reverb prints of different spaces. It's a cool thing to do, but I don't know how much the general player base would ever notice anything like that. Are you thinking of putting this on a VR platform? You know, people do ask it, but I don't know whether it might be a little bit too intense for VR, because it's heavy, and going through it in a game is probably still very emotionally affecting already. And if you're even further inside that experience, I don't know. I mean, we could. It's more like, is it appropriate to do, is the question that I don't know the answer to yet. But if a lot of people want it, then maybe. Let me know if I missed any questions. Just poke me. Cool. I think I got everything. I'll give it a couple minutes in case anyone does have anything. Oh, do you have any safety checks for the player in terms of content stuff, like safe areas of levels or things like that? So we put a lot of content warnings in the game. We have like a splash screen that appears before you even get to the menu, telling you that these themes are dealt with in the game. It's all over all our store pages, like Steam as well. It's in the content warning section. I can't control where it appears on the page, but it's there. And we also put another content warning before you start the actual game. Once you're in it, no. But I think there's always a balance to be drawn between making someone aware of what the content is and not like kind of wrecking the storytelling, because you've given them so much kind of content that's going to come up that, you know, they already know what's going to happen in the game from like a small paragraph. And so we're very clear about the themes that are dealt with, but not when each thing comes up in the game. But we also have things like resource lists on our website if anyone is affected, similarly to how they'll do for like Channel 4 and Netflix and things like that. So that's permanently up there. We have a Discord community as well. We're toying with the idea of when we actually launch the game, having like just setting up our own helpline that people could call, or like probably a Discord person that they could chat with, just for like the first couple of weeks and see if people use it or need it, just in case. But we'll see. Any tips on designing ambient system without middleware? You know what? Like, if you like visual programming and coding, the Unreal blueprints are really powerful in what you can do. And I would just learn that if you're into it, because I absolutely love building stuff in Unreal and I feel like a proper programmer when I do it. So yeah, I don't know, dig into the blueprints. Like Hellblade does lots of really cool stuff, and I'm pretty sure they just use the blueprints in Unreal, and I would consider them a really high standard of audio. Partnered with mental health program to have standby assistance to material. So yeah, we are working with Safe in Our World, which are a charity in the games industry that deal with mental health, and we're consulting professionals as well as we develop it. So we do really care about it and consider it a lot. Are there options for players to skip some areas if they're too triggering for them but want to experience other areas? Not at the moment, but the game's definitely not finished, so we could do that. I think there's the potential that things might not make sense if you've skipped like a part of the story. Yeah, I'm still considering the best way to do that. I've kind of thought about the idea of having people be able to say, these and these themes affect me, these and these fine, so can you warn me if this is going to happen in a particular place? But that's a very like custom system which would take a little bit longer to implement. But I've kind of thought about it, because if it's like, oh, grief affects me but I'm not bothered by anything else, or like, oh, I have a problem with self-harm, I don't want to read about it, for example, we could just like censor that material. So if you then decided you wanted to look at it, you could get it blocked before you then went through. Thanks, Lewis, for that question. Adrian says, what's your process to decide if a section of the game needs music or if it's just better without it? I think the default is it doesn't have music, but that's because they are kind of walking around generally like a house or a school or real environments, and we want it to feel relatively real to them. And I think most people don't have a soundtrack when they're walking around like their life. There's no underscore, and that helps it to feel real and have that gravity. So the process is basically like, assume there's no music, and then when it comes to a really impactful moment, should we put music here? But we have things like the menu and the intro has music because they're not real environments, they're just bits in the game. And then when you're in the kind of real environments, there's not music as a default. Dum 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 dum. Blueprints, my beloved. Oh yes. Any thoughts for a sequel? I don't know, Lewis. What do you want to put in the sequel? Anything you do now could potentially be a sequel. Pause menu with calming music if people need time out. I like that. That's a nice idea. So the pause menu is just a pause menu at the moment, but it will eventually be kind of like a diary inventory system, and then like your backpack with like any items you've collected. So we could put something like maybe like a portable Walkman or MP3 player, you know, like you used to have the little, not a proper iPod thing if you were poor, like I was. Or the little, I think I got like a Sony Walkman, like USB stick from Argos no, not Argos, from, what's the shop that closed down? I can't remember. Oh, Woolworths. Yeah, from Woolworths when they had their closing down sale. And yeah, that something like that we could have as an item in the menu that you could just activate at any time with some elevator chill music. I like that. I like that. Very nice. Do you have a favourite trinket on your shelves? Oh, tricky one. I don't know, maybe Spider-Man's the coolest. Let's see if my headphone stretches long enough. Spider-Punk is maybe the coolest one. I don't know how hard he is to get. But I always, as soon as I unlocked that costume in the PlayStation game, that was what I permanently wore for the whole thing. Anyway. The dog. Oh. That's fine dog. Elden Ring as well. Yeah, there's some Elden Ring stuff on the top. Hang on. There's like the helmet and the yeah, lots of little guys going on up there. Whoop. Anyway, nothing to do with the talk whatsoever, but fun. I got arrested for stealing fruit gums from Woolworths once. That brought them down. Well, that's sad because I liked Woolworths. You know, the pick and mix was decent. You could get loads of random stuff from there. It was good. Bad times, Nick. Bad times. That is the everything is fine dog. Yes. Oh, I'm gonna break it all. This is fine. Did I see the new Elden Ring story trailer? Might have. It's like 10 days till it comes out, the new DLC. We're all going to be quiet for a little bit then. I look forward to that anyway. Anyway, if there's no more sensible questions. What do you want, Greg? The Spider-Man or the dog? We can talk after. It's fine. Can we just continue to go through everything on my shelf? I don't want to take all my shelves apart. There's like the crow stuff. There's a Neopet, Scorchio, not a Pokemon, FYI. And there's little Pokemon balls that glow. There's more Pokemon things and some awards. Yeah, it's not that exciting. Everyone seems to like that the best though. Or maybe just think Lewis is funny. I've got a real dog. A real dog? Who's this? No, he's looking at me like, ugh. Can you play us out with some guitar? I'm not even entirely sure that my guitar's in tune. So I'm not sure how good that would be. The dog's looking at me. He's like, who are you talking to? Yourself again. Okay, cool. Well, if everyone's seen enough of my shelf. Anyway, well, I might see some people at the weekend with the massive, super massive, big meetup on the 15th, which is in London. So if you're Englandy, then that'll be really cool. But I hope everyone has a really amazing aircon and a really good week and has lots of learning and knowledge and makes new friends. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and I hope it was useful and cool to see that kind of stuff, a little bit of a behind the scenes look. It may all completely change and I've talked rubbish, but I'm sure some of it's useful. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.